Soraya, how's it going?
Hey Jeff, how are you?
Well, I was really, really awesome until about a half an hour ago.
Uh-oh.
So, my wife and I went to grab some tacos. It is Taco Tuesday for us
Of course.
while we're recording this. And I came back and I noticed that my two tortoises, Lenny and Squiggy, were out roaming around in the little grass area. And I figured I'd give them a snack. So, whenever we eat watermelon, we keep the rinds for them. They love the rinds.
Okay.
So I noticed that one of our rose bushes had a couple roses on it, and I usually like top the watermelon rinds with the rose petals because it's a treat for
Right.
them.
Right.
So I went to grab one of them, and somebody was occupying the the rose at the time, and I got stung, and now my hand's all swollen. I
Oh
know.
no.
I'm so sad too because I love bees. Bees are awesome. So, and I know once they sting, it's kind of the end of the road for them. So I'm kind of bummed. I'm bummed for the bee, and my swollen middle finger is not very fun. And that wasn't the end of it. Then I look over at my big turtle, Lenny, and right next to him is one of my rat traps with a big fat black rat
No.
still flopping around. And I had to get up here to do the podcast, so I scooped him up with the doggy scooper and I threw him on the side of the house, and he's still flopping around, so I got to go deal with that. But pretty soon I'm going to be saying bye bye, black rat. This will be number 4 that I've caught, and
Oh man.
otherwise the day is great. And I'm and I'm excited because coming up we're going to be speaking to Bradley from Bye Bye Blackbirds, the Bye Bye
Yes.
Blackbirds, about his new album Boxer at Rest. So um, I say we get into this.
Let's do it. Hi, this is Soraya.
And this is Jeff,
Our podcast is called Paisley Stage, Raspberry and Rhyme.
a podcast where the two of us play music that we like and share anecdotes and background about the tunes.
We hope you'll join our conversation. And without further ado, a grooviar.
Let's get groovy. Let's try it this way. There's more than one way to skin a rat.
Stop it. Stop it with the rats already.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
How you doing, Bradley? This is Jeff and Soraya.
Good to hear from you guys. Thanks for calling.
We're excited to talk to you today because we're big fans of Boxer at Rest. So,
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm excited to talk about it too. Great.
all right, well, let's get into it. So, for our listeners, on today's episode, Soraya and I are excited to be talking to Bradley. Bradley, help me out with your last name. I pronounce it Skaught because it looks like caught with an S in front of it.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's Skaught. Spelled weird, but pronounced
Yes.
normal.
So it's spelled Skaught for our listeners. And Bradley is, I'm going to say, the main guy from the Bye Bye Blackbirds at this point. And we first learned about the Bye Bye Blackbirds last year when Matt Piucci of the Rain Parade was raving about his pre-release copy of the new album Boxer at Rest. And he told us, Jeff and Soraya, you will not be disappointed when you hear this album. And once we got it, he was right. He was right, of course. He wasn't wrong at all.
I know I don't like to let him know that he's right, but he often is.
We'll keep that
Well,
on the down low.
He definitely was this time. The album is absolutely fantastic, and we're hoping to learn more about Boxer at Rest today by having you on the call. So we wanted to thank you, Bradley, for taking our call, and we wanted to welcome you to Paisley Stage, Raspberry and Rhyme.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
We want to jump right in and ask and ask about the album. So, the new album Boxer at Rest was released on April 24th, 2020. And it's the 5th album by the band, according to the press that we've gotten our hands on. And we understand that there were some challenges recording this album in particular. And we'd like to know if you could talk to us about the circumstances surrounding the recording of this album.
Sure. Yeah, it's sort of become a running thing where I go into a record thinking, oh, this one's going to be easy, this time, and it never is. Like, it's just kind of crazy how things come up. This was the scariest, probably, in terms of being a personal issue. Our guitar player Lenny had been dealing with some heart issues for years. It had some, pretty serious surgeries before that we had weathered as friends and as bandmates. But in the lead up to recording this record, it was clear that something more serious was going on, and so at the same time we're trying to figure out what that is, and kind of showing up for him, we're also making plans to record. And the main difference with this record was that we had an actual outside producer that had to fly in and work around a busy schedule. So, it was a much more complicated process in terms of booking time and all that stuff. And then once we had sort of finalized everything, it became clear that what Lenny actually needed was an actual heart transplant. So, the obviously the fear surrounding that, what does that even look like? Is he going to survive this? What's the future look like? And then at the same time, kind of having to decide, do we just kind of go ahead and just dive in and try to start this thing and figure it out as we go along? And to this day, I can sort of go both ways. But ultimately, I think we sort of just felt like, well, this is one of the ways that we're going to deal with this situation, is dive into this project and do this, album and work on things. And it became sort of a hopeful rallying point, that Lenny's going to recover and he's going to be well enough and he's going to come back and he's going to record his parts and we're going to have this great record. And that's ultimately what happened. But as you can imagine, it was a pretty fraught, roller coaster. And also, I sort of had to convince everyone that this was a doable thing. I remember talking to the engineer, Chris Von Snyder, and being like, so we're going to make this record and we're going to leave a hole. And this hole is going to be where the lead guitar goes. And every song is going to have this spot and we're just going to leave it blank. It's going to be great, and just kind of looking at me like, what are you talking about? But that's what we did. That's how we did it. And it worked miraculously.
So that's a very unusual process, right? Recording without one of your members being there. So that's it must have been a very interesting recording. So Bradley, we know that you and Lenny are members of the band at this point for the recording of Boxer at Rest. Can you tell us and our listeners about the history of the band and the band members and what led up to the current lineup and who the current lineup is?
Yeah. So Lenny and I are the last founding members. I keep forgetting exactly what year we started this. It's a long time, 12, 13 years, something like that. And our original guitar player, Ian Robertson, and I were sort of the founders initially. Like, we had this idea of what we wanted a new band to be like. He and I had played together previously in other projects for years, so we had this kind of chemistry and we kind of knew what we wanted. And our original bass player, William Duke, had played with Lenny before, so they kind of came together, and that lasted a while. And just general band turnover kind of situations. Probably the most dramatic one in terms of Lenny's situation is that Lenny was actually our drummer for many, many years, and on the first two records, 2.5 records, something like that. And when Ian Robertson left the band, Lenny actually took over lead guitar. So he sort of did the dramatic shift from the back of the stage to the front. And since then we've gone through a fair number of drummers, which I guess is your normal indie rock phenomenon. But Aaron Rubin, our bass player, has been with us for quite a while now, 7-8 years, maybe even closer to almost 10 years. So Lenny and Aaron and I really, we've made the bulk of the records together and shows and tours and things like that. One of the things that contributes to this record and to the way we recorded it and to the general feel of it is that we've had our current drummer, Joe Becker, for probably the longest we've had a drummer since Lenny's original stint. And that makes just, such a huge difference, having that continuity and playing a lot of shows with him and a lot of rehearsing with him. And obviously his background, he was in Thin White Rope, he was in the Loud Family. I mean, he's got this incredible history of making phenomenal records with great bands. So having a drummer like that for a long stretch and not having that drummer turnover thing, I think it was huge in terms of sort of our confidence in going into this record. And then there's two other members one is Casey Bowman, who I sort of think of as our jack of all trades guy. He doesn't rehearse with us very often. Sometimes he just comes to shows and he sings harmony, he sings percussion, he can do other guitar parts. He just kind of does whatever needs to get done, and he just shows up and knows how to do it. And then for this record, our friend Kelly Atkins was a huge part. She's one of my favorite singers and a local musician that I've interacted with for years. And she occasionally will play live with us, but mostly for this record, she's just a huge part of the harmony, arranging and singing and the blend. And so Casey and Kelly were a big part of this record, even if they're not always a part of the band in our day-to-day function.
Right, but as far as this record goes, they definitely had some significant input. From what I can tell,
huge.
Yeah.
The bulk of the vocal harmony stuff, which is always a kind of a focus on our records, was those two, was Casey and Kelly, and that was a big part of the personality of the record and really in their hands.
Nice. And you mentioned your drummer Joseph Becker. I believe he even played with Game Theory. Maybe. I know he played with Loud Family, so he definitely has that association with Scott Miller, but I think he might have even played on a Game Theory record or two, if I'm not mistaken.
He was in there's a lineup of Game Theory that existed briefly after Two Steps from the Middle Ages came out, and it was Gil Ray, the Game Theory's longtime drummer, had hurt his back and couldn't play drums, and so he played keyboards and guitars, and Joe played drums, and Michael Quercio played bass. It was they didn't make a record per se, but there was a compilation that came out this year on Omnivore that collects demos and live recordings and things that lineup did. So yeah, Joe was in a Game Theory lineup, and now something that's sort of documented on record. And Joe was Scott's childhood friend. They went back, to childhood and played and stuff before Game Theory. So there's a long history there.
Okay. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And I think you even had, you were friends with Scott as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. We were pretty good friends, and we played some shows together. Scott had somewhat retired by the time he and I got close, but he would, come out and play shows once in a while, and he and I would either put a little band together or just do it as a duo or something like that. So yeah, I knew Scott pretty well.
I like that. Just a little band. Two pretty great musicians. Just a little band. We've got another question. There are some pretty heavy hitters from the indie circles in the production credits for this album. Doug Gillard in producer role and Chris Von Snydern engineering Boxer at Rest. And we wanted to know how they came to be involved with this project.
Yeah, Doug and I have known each other kind of peripherally for a really long time, maybe 20 some years. When I first moved to California, I played drums for this really great singer-songwriter named Yuji Oniki. And Yuji and Doug went back to college radio days in the 80s, and Doug would always do some guitar parts on Yuji's records. And so we were in the same kind of circle for a little bit, and I was still am a huge Guided by Voices fan. And that process really got me into Doug's other stuff too, the Death of Samantha and Doug's own solo stuff. And then there's another funny connection, which is that Doug's wife is actually an old friend of mine as well, and she was my first roommate when I moved to California. So
Oh,
Oh
we've
wow.
just sort of we've had this funny kind of social musical connection off and on for years, and I'm a huge fan of everything he does. And so I just had it in my head, that at some point I would love for some project to materialize that would be, I could get him involved. And and this, when we had this record coming together and we were rehearsing it, we were all really excited about it. It sort of felt like the time was right to bring in, someone to do that, to be in a more, established producer role. And Doug was one of the first people I thought of. Chris von Snydern is, another fantastic songwriter, and another guy that when I moved out here, immediately gravitated to go to his shows and became a fan of. And over the years, I started hearing from people like, oh, he's actually a really great recording engineer. And I want to say, maybe a couple of years ago, he did a record by this great local songwriter named Tom Heyman, and it was just a cool sounding record, and I just love the feel of it, and it felt very in sync with kind of where our heads were at in terms of what we wanted to sound like. And so I thought, oh, this is a great opportunity to work with Chris. He also he's got his own little studio, and it's in the same complex as Hyde Street Studios. And Hyde Street is the old Wally Heider studio. So this is kind of holy ground in rock and roll. This is, Creedence, Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Van Morrison. That's the kind of, David Crosby. This is the level of awesome that you're sort of dealing with at Hyde Street. And working with Chris, you can work at Hyde Street. You can work in their big room, and so it just sort of added, to this sense of excitement about it. This kind of gravitas is like, oh, okay, we're going to work with these, guys that I really admire, and we can do it in this kind of legendary space, where so many incredible classic records have been made. So that was the process of getting those guys involved.
That's amazing. And
that's
I will say that in addition to the music being great on this record, it really sounds amazing.
mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, and Chris is one of the easiest engineers I've ever worked with in terms of just, his instincts. He knows what to do. He knows that room really well. I mean, it's probably the least amount of time I've spent fussing over sounds in a studio. It just seemed like every time you put a mic up, it was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what that's supposed to sound like. It was
Nice.
such a relief, so great.
Fantastic.
That's got to be great as an artist to not have to worry
Yeah.
about those kind of things. Leave that to the engineer, right? And I wanted to
Yeah,
mention.
well, that
Also,
was.
go ahead.
I was just going to say that's part of the thinking from a personal standpoint with getting both Doug and Chris involved really was to just focus on playing. I enjoy being a band leader. I love being in the studio. I really sort of the motivating, personality on a lot of fronts with everything we do. But I was sort of in a headspace, particularly with this record, of just like, I don't want to be the guy that has to make every single call. Like, I want to put really good people in charge so that, when a take is done, I'm not the one that everyone looks at. I can just be the guitar player and the singer. And, and I made a lot of decisions and picked and chose my moments to be directing things. But it was really nice to have just really talented people to let them,
Nice. Very
be
nice.
in charge.
And I will say about Doug, I'm a huge Not a Surf fan. I love that band, and he's a very prominent member at times, for the most part, of that band too. So that was really cool when I saw his name pop up in the credits. But Bradley,
Yeah.
one more thing. I'm curious about the title of the album, because usually with album titles, you'll see a song title or you'll see the name of the album appear in lyrics. I don't see any of that. So where does this title come from, Boxer at Rest?
The title is there's a statue, a sculpture, an ancient Greek sculpture that in English is called Boxer at Rest. And I was watching some kind of art history documentary on television, And and this particular episode was focused on the art of antiquity, and the sculpture itself is kind of stunning, and it's almost hard to believe it's as old as it is. It feels like such a contemporary theme. It's of an older boxer, clearly just, you know, either between rounds or having finished a fight, beat up, exhausted, you know, visible injuries. It's a very powerful sculpture, and I think the combination of being struck by this sort of famous sculpture that I had never seen, the phrase "boxer at rest," I just kind of loved the sound of that and the words, and then thematically it just sort of resonated. You know, it just this idea of, you know, sort of being beaten up and going through turmoil, but being resilient and sort of having this mentality of survival and competition and you know, digging deep to get through challenges or whatever. All of those things just sort of combined at once, and I don't know, it was just sort of like a light bulb moment. I was like, oh, that title really makes sense for this. Even though, like you said, there's nothing in the lyrics about it. There's no song called that, but yeah, that combination of experiences really resonated.
It's an intriguing title, and one of the things that we found really interesting is we understand that the band put out the album independently. And in fact, you did most of the work yourself. And we were curious if you could talk to us a little bit about the process of self-releasing the album and the record label, Double Potions Records.
Yeah, we've been on a couple labels briefly in the past. But you know, it's kind of a funny scene, as you guys know, the music industry landscape. It's not like it used to be, is the cliche, in terms of labels and especially in terms of the kinds of music that labels are interested in. For the most part, small indie labels are very, very specific, kind of narrow focused genre things. And for whatever reason, you know, we don't fit easily into any of those. And with some previous records, I would always go through this process of you know, trying to get in touch with people, connections I had to labels, see if we could get someone to help us out, split the cost, pick it up, do something like that. And at some point, I just reached this level of thinking that wasn't really worth it anymore. That I could do anything a small label could do for the most part on my own. You know, if you look around sort of the musical landscape, you'll see a lot of artists, even established artists, just, you know, putting things out themselves on Bandcamp. If they're big enough, they might license to a label, but they're still kind of owning it themselves. And so it just became sort of a habit, you know. I just got used to it. And you know, I don't know if I'm particularly good at it, but I kind of like being, you know, being that hands-on about it. I was thinking lately about the Greg Sage, the frontman for Wipers, and sort of his kind of in-house, you know, processes that he began way back in the late 70s, early 80s. And when I was growing up in the Northwest and getting to know local rock and roll and stuff up there, he was such a hero to a lot of people for that reason. You know, I mean, obviously great music too, but it was always just sort of like, oh, it's so cool. You know, he records his own records and he's got his own say in it. And you know, it really, what you get is really his whole complete vision. And, you know, I mean, I know he was on Restless and Tim Kerr, I think, at some point, but for the most part, that idea is really attractive to me. And, you know, not to say that if Merge, you know, called tomorrow, I would say no, but, you know, but it's just easier, and it's increasingly easier as the music industry gets weirder and more kind of murky in terms of how things bubble to the surface and how things make it to people's ears. It's almost just easier to have everything in your apartment and just say, here it is, and then do your best to try to get as many people to hear it as possible.
I love that. So is distribution a concern at this point in the music industry, or with the internet is distribution not something that you're as concerned with?
It makes a difference. That is a bummer that it's not sitting on a rack at Grimey's in Nashville or something, and someone, doesn't have that moment of like, oh, my friend mentioned that, or I, read about it in Big Takeover or something. So that is an issue. And that, I don't necessarily know what the number difference would be, like how much that would expand the sales. But, it's also, like you said, things are so much more focused on ordering directly and pre-ordering. A lot of people have just moved purely digital, streaming services. They don't even buy downloads anymore. I mean, that was one thing I noticed on, I think, the latest whatever sheet that I got about this record is it used to be that, iTunes was like a big thing, and then the streaming services kind of fell in line after that. And now it's totally flip-flopped. Almost nobody buys the download from another service, So so distribution makes a difference, especially if you're going to tour, I think, and you're really getting out to different towns and getting your name out there. But, again, sort of having it all in-house is fine. It's comfortable, and it just means that, I have to do a little more work trying to push outside the bubbles that I know, my circles, and try to get, new ears on it.
Nice. Well, I have to tell you, Bradley, that I have an agenda in talking to you, and that is to get our listeners to listen to this record.
Yes.
So I do have an agenda, I will say.
I love this agenda. This is great.
I got to be upfront.
I fully endorse your agenda.
And we promoted it. We promoted the album too on the Bandcamp First Fridays. I mean, we're big fans, big fans.
That means an enormous amount personally, and also just that's sort of the way things are right now, is sharing what you love and drawing attention to it. And if there's a positive in releasing a record during the pandemic and the various crises that we're living through at the moment, one of them is in the arts. People are really, I think, paying attention. I think you post a link and a lot more people are like, hey, I'm going to make the time to play this, to listen to this. And I see a lot of musicians saying, hey, listen to my friend's record, maybe more than even I remember in the past. And so that kind of thing, that sort of drawing attention to it, it doesn't just feel like marketing. It feels like that's how we're getting through things for those of us that love art and get a lot out of it,
Yeah, and as we previously mentioned, that's what led us to Boxer at Rest. So it was that personal recommendation. So we are passing that forward.
Thank you. Well, it's much appreciated.
So Bradley, Boxer at Rest has 9 songs on it, and in my opinion, it falls in that perfect range of 30 to 35 minutes. So like you have records like the Shins' Oh Inverted World or the debut Weezer album. That for me, that's the sweet spot in between the 30 and 35 minute range, because at the end of it, with a record like Boxer at Rest, you want to go back and listen to it again. Like we need more. So the album is about 33 minutes. Do you mind if we go through the entire album track by track? And as we go through the tracks, if you want to talk about what the song is about or just about the recording process, either one, whatever you feel more comfortable. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, twist my arm.
Okay, all right. So the album starts off with the lead-off track, You Were All Light, and it has my favorite lyrics from the album, and that's time buries its thorns in our side, double-crossed, lonely and blind, but we held its hands through the night. I love that phrase in referencing time, that we held its hands through the night. I just absolutely love that. Time buries its thorns in our side, double-crossed, lonely and blind, but we held its hands through the night. You, all that you promised was true. Do you mind telling us about the inspiration about "You Were All Right"?
Yeah, that song is one of the few that I kind of knew immediately what it was about. So we mentioned Gil Ray earlier, and he was pretty much my best friend for a long time. And the album, the writing of this album, sort of kicked in for me in a major way, maybe a month or so after he passed away. And I don't remember exactly what order things were written in, but that song, I knew immediately that that's what was coming through in terms of what I was writing about, that I was writing about Gil and sort of his spirit in my life, but in all of his friends' lives and certain things that he represented. Some of which are very specific, some lines stick out. I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that's about. And some are very, I don't know where they come from. I don't necessarily know what they mean, but they, feel right. So that song is very much about Gil and about, just sort of celebrating lost friend, which is one of the themes that kind of pops up throughout the record. And so that's really what that one's about.
Oh, great. Yeah, I knew that you guys were friends. I didn't know that it was specifically about him or referencing him or he was the inspiration behind that. But I absolutely love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I did want to mention from a musical standpoint with this song, it's very interesting because the song has horns in it, as does another song on the album. And one touch that I love about this particular song is it's a very pop song, but it's got this slight dissonance in the descending guitar notes after the chorus. There's some bends, and it's just so slight, but it just adds this feel to it, to an otherwise pop song, and you have this dissonance in these notes, and they're fantastic.
Our bones grew fragile. Still, the roads we haunt will rise to meet us. All this time, like waves in the heavens, hang on tight.
Can you talk to us about how the horns came in, whose idea that was, and about the musicians that play the horns?
Yeah, the horn stuff, that's a love of mine. I love horns and rock records, and I'm always kind of looking for opportunities to use it, but sometimes in an unusual way. I think left to my own devices, I would probably do it too much. So for most of our records, anytime there's horns or trumpet, we use this friend of mine named Bill Swan, who was the trumpet player and lead guitar player in Beulah, who were one of my favorite bands.
I love
from back
Beulah.
in the
Yoko is such a great album. Oh my gosh!
Incredible record. So Bill is the guy. Bill's the Beulah guy. He and Miles were the main dudes in that band, and Bill always he's just kind of one of these really, really natural musicians. He always has some idea that's just phenomenal. Whatever little thing it is, it just brings so much to the song. So he's responsible for the horns on this record. And that guitar thing, to me, really kind of screamed for horns, but I didn't want it to happen all the way through. I wanted it to be sort of a special thing that came in towards the end. And Bill and we're huge fans of the Verlaines, the Flying Nun Band, and Graham Downes has this sort of gift for using horns in an unusual way, in very kind of dense, chordal, interesting ways in rock music. And so I sort of feel like that whole end part where the horns are kind of droning on top of the, guitar changes and stuff like that, that feels kind of Verlainesy to me. So I think that's sort of Bill and I, calling on our sort of Grand Downs fandom and bringing that element.
So the Verlaines, they were the band that did that Death and the Maiden song. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a great song.
It is. And that's their most famous song probably, but they have a pretty big catalog, and they went through a lot of interesting changes. And he's a fascinating songwriter, a real hero of mine that I think is worth people spending more time and digging in, and investigating. A really unique songwriter. And just like I said, used strings and horns and sort of orchestral details in a rock band context in a pretty unique way, in a very non-prog sort of way.
And second track is How Do We Stay? And these lines stood out to me. And if we want to start breathing now, can we hold the storm in our lungs, then blow it away?
And if we're gonna start feeling now, can we feel just like the ocean with all of its waves? Its waves. And if we wanna start breathing now, can we hold the storm in our lungs, then blow it away?
Okay, first of all, I love the poetry of that, but we'd love to know the story behind this song.
This song is about, I don't know if you remember, a number of years ago, there was a tragedy in Oakland. There was a fire in a warehouse. It was a nightclub called the Ghost Ship. And it was extremely, it was horrific, of course, on a personal level, but it was also very traumatic for the city and the region. It was this kind of horrible tragedy in an arts community, in a young arts community, something that all of us who live here, who are involved in the arts in any way, had some connection to. And it's a scar and a trauma that this city of Oakland has not recovered from and has not really processed, and the legal processes that have come after that have not made it any easier. And similar to sort of how I found, myself dealing with Gil's loss coming through songs, this, is a little while after the Ghost Ship tragedy. All of a sudden it was like there's actually 2 songs on the record. We'll get to the other one later that are about it. And it was, the kind of thing where I never would have conscientiously sat down and said, I'm going to write a song about this. What do I think about it? What do I feel about it? But, that song was written very quickly, kind of immediately, had this real feel to it. The lyrics came very simply and easily for me. And it was one of those things where I kind of finished it, looked down on the page, and I was like, oh, wow, okay, I know where this feeling comes from. And it's that sort of, not just, personal response to this tragedy, but living in a place where that kind of tragedy has really hit, and you're, the human part of that doesn't, isn't easy to process.
Right.
So I think, Bradley, piggybacking on How Do We Stay, and especially with what we're going through now in California with all of our fires that we're fighting, the next song is so true.
The city is burning down. One
in that song, the song mentions burning, smoke, flames. I don't know if those are literal words or metaphorical, but can you tell us about this one? Is this one also related to that same incident or something similar?
It's not. It's a different incident, and in this case, it really is very literal. There was a long stretch where there were a lot of very mysterious fires in the Mission District in San Francisco, and it was kind of one of those things where like an old building would burn down, and then the next thing you know, there was a really fancy condominium going up in that same lot. And the combination of this sort of apocalyptic feeling of massive fires in an urban environment combined with gentrification and changing personalities of a neighborhood, of a famous neighborhood in San Francisco. That was really, those kind of things were all stirred up for me in writing this one. Because this whole area, like a lot of urban areas in America, is undergoing gentrification and rapid changes. And it's sort of an out of control feeling. And you feel like powers beyond the neighborhoods themselves and the people who live here are making decisions about the place that you live. And in this case, there's this kind of violent aspect of literal homes burning to the ground and being replaced by places where the people who lived there before certainly weren't going to be living. So that song really came out of that period of thinking about that, and then really just a friend and I walking around the Mission after one of these fires and seeing that pattern.
It's when you think about that, this song really, I don't know, it leaves you with a lot of things to kind of process at the end. And now hearing a little more about the story, for me, it makes it even more so. It makes it even more so.
Well, hopefully it's not too specific too. I think my process of writing is to stay as in touch with the feelings
Mm-hmm.
and resonant images, resonant ideas, and less about the specifics of whatever's going on. And hopefully that comes across too, so that it's not necessarily like, oh, this is the San Francisco song where buildings burn down, but this is a song about something that's going on around here that's changing, the place that I live, and how do I feel about that? How do I navigate that?
I agree. And I think just as a listener, in case you haven't figured it out, Jeff is a musician and I'm not, but I listen to lyrics and I process them and I, analyze them. And so there are songs and there are lyrics that resonate with me. And so the feeling that I had with So True was one where I was kind of left afterward, just thinking. And now hearing the story, yes, not necessarily super specific, but still leaves you with things to think about. Yeah.
That's great. I feel like lyrics are such a huge priority for me, both as a listener and as a writer. And it's fun to talk about them because people kind of rarely do. It seems like you read a lot of record reviews and interviews and stuff, and it's kind of surprising how rarely, attention is really paid to the lyrics of renowned songwriters. So it's great. It's really moving actually to have someone reading the lyric sheet or paying attention or thinking about those things. It's great.
Well, I like doing it. So, and there are songs that inspire you. So, and then the next song, Jeff, I don't think I'm talking out of turn here when I say this is really what kind of made me, go all in on Bye Bye Blackbird. And it's Baby, It's Still You. And we found a really, really great live solo performance of the song on YouTube that we're absolutely recommending for our listeners to check out. And we'll provide a link on our page to it. And again, going back to the lyrics, the imagery of some of the lyrics are so interesting. So I just want to mention two lines in particular. So one of them, who's that chasing the days? Who's that pulling the reins when the world's not slowing down?
Hey girl, when your phone stops ringing off the hook, did you take a little time just to give us a second look? We've been cut loose from somewhere till we're no one from nowhere. Who's that chasing the days? Who's that pulling the reins when the world's not slowing down? 'Cause maybe it's still you. Maybe it's still you.
And then a little later on, when the streets that we live on lead to rooms we don't know.
When the streets that we live on lead to rooms we don't know. Who's that chasing the days? Who's that pulling the reins when the world's not slowing down? 'Cause maybe it's still you. Maybe it's still you.
What can you tell us about Baby It's Still You? I love this song. Love it.
Thank you. It's similar to the first song. It's another, kind of tribute to lost friend song. The specifics of it are not as maybe not as specific, I guess. But it's really a friend who was lost way too young, and the thing that I felt while writing it, and then I get when I hear it or read the lyrics, is the sense of how someone's spirit and how someone's energy and how their personality perseveres, and in a way, the song is almost speaking directly to this person and saying, you're not here, what's happened has happened and you're lost to us in this way, but all of these things that you represent to us in our lives survive, and these things are still here, and you're still playing this role in our lives in this really kind of beautiful way, or hopefully beautiful way. Hopefully that comes across. So it's a sad song of loss in a way, but it's also a song essentially kind of speaking to that lost person, saying you're still here, you're still appreciated, our love for you still survives in these ways that are distinctly you.
Mm-hmm.
And you bring in horns again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the horns are great on this one.
They are. I love one of my favorite horn details in that song is the sort of that little bit leading up to the chorus. Bill's trumpet part in there it sounds like something from a Bacharach record. Like it's like this really kind of jazzy, hooky little line, and I just love that. Like that's when I talk about sort of the genius of Bill Swan and his ability to find amazing little melodies and hooks and things in songs. That's a perfect example. No one else would come up with something like that.
I love that. I'm still blown away that it's the Bill Swan of Beulah. I'm a huge Beulah fan. I mean,
oh, that's awesome.
Nobody can write, Miles can write some melodies that will stick in my head for months. They're a great band. That one documentary that they did of their last tour was heartbreaking for me to watch, but I'm a huge, what was it called? The band that won't survive or something like that. Whatever that DVD was of their last tour. Because I'm such a huge fan of Beulah's or was, and that was a tough watch, but I'm blown away.
Yeah, really. I hope that there's a revival of interest. I mean, they have their fans. Those records still are popular, but I I hope that at some point, people really are like, oh, wait a minute, listen to what Miles did as a songwriter, listen to what this band did musically, because they're pretty special and pretty unique. And and talk about lyrics. I mean, Miles is just such a fascinating, strange, funny, smart lyricist. And hopefully we haven't heard the last from him. I have a feeling that there's more. I know I keep in touch with him a little bit, and he's had a kid, and he's been sort of living his parent life and doing all these other work changes and stuff. But I know that he doesn't really ever quit. I know that there's still that bug in there. Hopefully that's going to come out, because he's a really special songwriter.
Yeah, his post Beulah solo album is fantastic too.
It is, and if you read the credits, we actually sing on it. That was sort of we did some of the. There's like 3,000 people, I think, on that record, and I think we're like number 2,700 through 2,704. I can't remember, but yeah, we actually got called in to do some of the harmony singing and stuff on that. So really proud of that. Love being a part of that record, because that's a cool record that I think a lot of people miss.
Yeah, it's great, and there's some really, really funny videos from that album too. But today we're talking about Boxer at Rest.
Yes.
So closing out side one, I'm a vinyl listener, Bradley, so this is the last song on side one. It's Words and Signs. Yeah. So I'm going to go off on a little dirty side road on this, because in the song there's a line that says, whiskey glows in dusty rooms.
All the lonely souls that bow like autumn leaves, whiskey glows in dusty rooms. I couldn't stand the light without the clouds.
And I just wanted to mention for our listeners that Bradley posts these pictures of drinks, adult spirits, on his page. And I don't know if you are a bartender, but when you describe what's in these drinks, they sound amazing, and it always makes me want to go to our little bar and try to come up with something, but they never look half as good as what you post. So, were you a bartender? Where do all these ideas for drinks come from?
No, I mean it's it's a hobby, I guess. And it's a quarantine coping process.
Right.
I sort of realized the other day, I was like, boy, people on social media must think I'm a total loss.
No, not that at all.
I love the aesthetics of drinks and cocktails. And I guess I didn't even really think about that line and in that context until you brought it up. But I don't go to bars a lot, even when you can go to bars. But when I do, I love, what drinks look like sitting on a bar, counter. I love watching them get made. I love how people hold them. There are certain bars that I like maybe as much for the light in the room as I do, whatever they serve. So it's funny. I guess I hadn't really thought about how that fed into the song, but that is a thing that I sort of respond to. And so if I'm taking photos and talking about a drink that I've made at home or something, that's sort of the same thing. It's like, oh, how pretty this looks, and oh, the light's just right. How cool, I get excited about that kind of thing.
Before we get back to the song, I'm just a small aside. It's not just spirits, okay? Because he does the same thing. He posts these photos of these beautiful plates of food. He does these Sunday brunches where you want to jump in the photo and sit at the table. And it's like you see things with colors and textures, and the way he describes it is pretty amazing. So it's like you see these beautiful spirits and you see this beautiful food, and you're like, damn, I want to go over to Bradley's house now.
I know.
I want to share a drink. I want to sit at that table. So just know, we're watching it all.
Yes.
We're watching it all.
We want to be...
Just give me like 10 minutes notice so you won't catch me microwaving a hot dog or something. Like that's the key. I really got to keep the appearances up.
But anyways,
We
words and signs.
yes. So, Words and Signs, which is basically a solo acoustic song from what I can tell. And it has my second favorite
Hmm.
line from the album, and that's I haunt your singing like a ghost. I pray it never ends.
I haunt your singing like a ghost. I pray it never ends. All the way home, I keep the chorus spinning in my head and hear the words and see the signs.
I love that line. Um, so,
Thank you.
this is the one song on the album that sounds like it's strictly Bradley Scott. Is that correct?
It is. Yeah. Yeah. Just guitar and voice. Nothing. No overdubs. Basically straight up.
So, what is the song about?
I think there's a thread that runs through my songwriting off and on since I was a teenager, of songs that are kind of about my hometown. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, up in the Puget Sound, and um, I haven't lived there for a really long time, but it's a city that just has a real mystique for me, a kind of almost like a personal mythology about it. I love the history of it. I love a lot of things about it. But it sort of is in my subconscious all the time in different ways. And I feel like this song is really kind of reflective in that regard. I think there's something about it. I can't quite put my finger on it. It's maybe addressed to people I knew there, people I grew up with, kind of looking back on, how lives have diverged maybe. So I don't have a real like solid sense of what it's about exactly, but it really feels like another song that's sort of in that hometown mythology kind of state of mind that I often find myself in.
I love that. And it sounds to me like with some of these songs that you're just a conduit. Like these songs just kind of happen and you're there. That's what it sounds like to me. Like maybe you filter some things, but they sounds like some of these words they just come to you.
That's really very much how I work. I was just reminded when you were saying that of something that I read in a Scott Miller interview, but it was also something that he told me on occasion too when we would have musical conversations. And he always said that for him to understand what he was talking about in a song, he would listen to that song the way he would listen to someone else's song.
Mm.
He would listen to it and read the lyrics and say and come draw conclusions based on what he was reading and hearing and thinking about, and not that he had gone into the song with a very clear idea of what he wanted to write about. And that's how I write as well. I it's not necessarily just purely automatic writing where I don't know what the words are at all. They sort of feed each other. You come up with a line, you come up with a hook, you come up with some lyrics, and then you just sort of follow that feeling, follow the sounds of the words, and the editing process is where you kind of make it cohere, make it sound good, make it stick together. But yeah, it's definitely not a process where I know what I'm writing usually while I'm writing it. It's usually something that I feel or discover later, and sometimes it's a complete surprise, and sometimes it's always mysterious. Sometimes I never really know. It's just a matter of finding the spot where the words feel right, and they feel right being sung, and they feel right in relation to all the other words.
I love that. I love that idea that you and
Yeah.
Scott had with listening to your own song and hearing it as a listener. That's
Right.
so great.
It was something that I think, bonded over, as we got to know each other, because almost all of our conversations were music related. You know, it was just this sort of ongoing musical conversation, stuff we were listening to primarily. But I think we're very different writers in a lot of ways, but that was one thing that was very similar for us, was this idea that you put yourself in a place where you're attentive to, you know, ideas that are coming through, and you trust that, and your process is not so much focusing it onto specific topics, but being aware of what's coming through and being aware of what really resonates, what really has feeling to it, and trusting yourself as you get better at it, that there's some kind of truth behind it. That's why it's resonating. You know, like the reason this phrase feels perfect right now is because it's telling you something, and you can figure it out later. But for now, you can just kind of trust it.
Isn't it? I almost don't want side one to end, but let's flip it over. So flipping over to side two, and you know, it's interesting because side one, there's a lot to process, and then we flip it over and we start out with Watch Them Chime.
Feel the sunshine on our head. Feel the sunshine on our heads. I know we'll cry it out forever. Tip the whole town into the sea and watch it rise. We will, I know we will. Feel the sunshine on our head. Feel the sunshine on our head. I know we'll wind the clocks together. Pull the hours apart at the sea.
And it really has this optimistic feel and this sense of hope over adversity. And I'm wondering, am I on the right track?
Yes, you are definitely, and it has that for me too. And it's funny because we were just talking about editing and how you do, and that's a song that I could have very easily ruined and really sort of had a sense that I was going to do that, because I felt like I just wanted to make it weirder. I wanted to make it more complicated. I wanted to have, I don't know why, you know, I just had this kind of nagging thing, and I caught myself, luckily, I think every time, and just said, no, just leave it alone. Just leave it alone. And when it was finally sort of ready and I played it for my bandmates and other people, you know, everyone was just sort of responded that same way. It was like, oh yeah, no, this just feels complete. This is, you don't have to mess with this at all. This is great. And so I love now that it is a very hopeful song. And the verses, you know, there's some, you know, kind of recognition, I think, in the verses that, you know, times are troubled, things are going on, it's complicated, but that chorus just sort of obliterates all that. The chorus is very clear that there's, you know, there's hopefulness, that there are positive experiences, that there are things happening that are not overwhelmed by the complicated things going on around them.
This is actually my favorite song on the entire album. I just love Watch Them Chime. It's definitely my favorite. There's a riff in there that actually reminds me of the Pixies a little bit, with that da na 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 na.
We will, I know we will. We will, I know we will.
Oh yeah.
It kind of reminds me of what's that song? Here Comes Your Man, or something like that. A little bit.
Yeah.
There's
that's
some
very
similar.
cool.
But that being said, this is my favorite song. I love Watch Them Chime. This is, if I was still making mixtapes for girls that I went to school with, Watch Them Chime is gonna be on there. All right. So that being said, let's move on. So the next song has kind of parts of it has hints of rockabilly to me with like the timing, the timing of the drums, and we go from a very optimistic song, watch them chime, even though we know there's all this adversity and things that we're dealing with, and then we come to War is Still Hell.
Hell, war is still hell. We can't fall much further, can we, baby? Tell, I pray, but don't tell. If there's how much more, and can we take it? Do you know the words that no one has heard? Hearts are warm when hearts are open. Stitch them up after they're broken. Light them up when healed and hold them. Do they ever burn? City streets of thoughts of violence. Stamp your soul in water rising. Light them up when cracked and dry. But do they ever burn?
And I wasn't sure if this was a title from a Slayer album or from Bye Bye Blackbirds. So can you tell us about War is Still Hell?
Well, it's definitely a Slayer cover. No, it's funny. I didn't really even think about the juxtaposition of those two songs. Yeah, I just don't want people to get too comfortable. Yeah, I mean, it's the darkest song in that sense, and that there's kind of some anger, there's some real frustration in it. The way that I have sort of taken to thinking about it is, I live in Oakland, and Oakland is a real activist city, and particularly during the Occupy marches, I felt really attuned to sort of the way that the city kind of jumps off their couch and runs out into the street, when things are heating up. And I don't necessarily know, if the song has a kind of pessimistic or optimistic sense about it, but it's more just that feeling of being in a place where, people are really aware that the conversations you're overhearing are conversations about social justice. They're conversations about economic realities and racial strife and things like that. And I work in Berkeley, which is famous for that, and has a very different personality. But again, is an activist city in that regard. So I think just living, your kind of day-to-day life in a place where that kind of stuff is really present for people. It's really on their minds, and it's right outside your door. I think that's what fed into that song lyrically.
Perfect.
And then we get to If It Gets Light. Clocking in at over 7 minutes. Jeff, you were talking about that sweet spot. This song stands out. Obviously for being the longest song on the album. And we were just curious about the inspiration behind this song.
It's a funny one. It's in a way, I'm surprised that I hadn't written a song like it before, because it is really unique for me. But it's very in keeping with things that I have absorbed and loved since I was young. And, I'm a huge Velvet Underground fan. There's a great band in the 90s and 2000s called Outrageous Cherry that I love. And that sort of droney driving, the song is mostly one chord with guitar freakouts, all of that kind of stuff. That's stuff that I love, but for whatever reason, it had never really materialized in my own writing. And, I have no recollection of writing the song in terms of, what my mindset was, but it just sort of started falling into place. And the more that I was, putting it together, the more I kept thinking like, oh, this just feels like this really kind of unhinged song. It's so primal in so many ways, even though there's a lot of subtle detail in it, both lyrically and musically. But it felt like something that could have been on, the Velvet Underground's Matrix tapes or something like that, just this really like kind of epic thing. And it was a song that instantly sounded good. I brought it to the band and it was like, oh yeah, we know exactly what to do, and it just kind of fell into place. Every time we played it live, it would have this really kind of, it would make an impact and people would really respond to it. It's a song that's different every time. The solos are not scripted. They're not written. So they can be a lot longer. They can be a lot shorter. They can be noisier. They can be more melodic. Yeah, for me, it's a very exciting song. It's something I'm really proud of because it represents another aspect of what we do as a band that hadn't been captured on record before and hadn't really been realized before.
Yeah, the guitars are fantastic. And there's even a feedback on, I think, on the second section of the guitar blowout part. And I would imagine this song killing live. And I was just curious, especially with Lenny coming in later, it seems like it would be a difficult song to record in the studio to me. Playing live, yes, I imagine, yeah, this is just probably maybe towards the end of the set and just a monster live version. Was it difficult to capture this in a studio setting?
It wasn't. My anxiety leading up to it was enormous because for exactly the reasons you're talking about. I was like, how are we going to do this? And I will say that we did have time to rehearse as a trio leading up to recording. So we were getting very used to the idea of leaving the spaces for Lenny's parts and knowing what they were. We had demos and stuff. But this one, like you said, it's so much about improvising that I really didn't. I was really concerned about how much work was going to have to go into, and then concerned that work was going to make it sound different, that it wasn't going to have that sort of organic, free-flowing sort of feel, that we were going to have to script it, and then it was going to get stiff and kind of be boring. And I guess all I can really say is that somehow I just kind of got into like kind of trance mode with it.
I can,
yeah. It was just I stopped thinking about it. The first two little solo bits are Lenny's solos by himself, and so for those sections, I was just playing that rhythm part, and then when it felt like I was done playing that rhythm part, I just went to the next section. I didn't really count it. I didn't think. I just thought, Lenny will know what to do. He'll just do his thing. It'll be fine. And then the main solo part is both of us soloing at the same time, and my solo, I just went into it, it's not overdubbed. I just, stepped on some noisy pedals and went for it and treated it as a trio performance. I didn't really think at all, another guitar's got to interact. I just said, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. And, Lenny will do his thing. So that performance that's on the record is very, very live, very off the floor. The drums, bass, rhythm guitar are all the original drum, bass, rhythm guitar tracks. None of those things were replaced. It was maybe the first or second take. I don't remember now, but it was just very spontaneous. And so somehow I just managed to turn that off and just let it go. And one of the things that was sort of encouraging too about it was not only did it feel great as a trio, like we all immediately liked it and we thought, oh, this is great. The power of the song was there already. But in a cool way, while Lenny was recuperating from his surgery, one of the ways that he sort of built back his strength and rehabbed was playing along with these songs and getting his playing back, but also just sort of, the emotional and intellectual aspect of recovery as well. And so I think it was part of what's cool about that song is that the stuff that he came in and did essentially in one pass is sort of an extension of that recovery process, that he lived with this thing that we did as a trio and really felt it and really just kind of organically absorbed it so that when he played, it wasn't this mapped out thing. He was also in that space. He had kind of, spent time with it and really absorbed it. So I feel really grateful that we were able to keep this ensemble live feel for something that, like you said, was really, potentially treacherous in terms of how to capture something like that with a key piece missing.
Wow. This is actually my second favorite song on the album, behind Watch Them Chime. I love it. But I'm a guitar player, so of course I would say that.
Awesome.
And then, Soraya, I wanted to ask you, do you remember when we had Michael Quercio on the show talking about the Game Theory album that Bradley was referring to later? Do you remember that quote that he said, "Get to the fucking chorus"? Do you remember that?
There you go.
So I wanted to tell you, with this song, the chorus does not begin until the 6-minute mark. And it's thrown in at the end of the song. But yeah, I love it.
It gets light, then it gets light. Let's see how the day comes. Hey, if it gets light, then it gets light. Let's see how the day comes. Hey, if it gets light, then it gets light. Let's see how the day comes. Hey, if it gets light, then it gets light. Let's see how the day comes.
So that does not happen in any other song on this album. On the rest of the album, Bradley gets to the fucking chorus. On this one,
yeah,
it's definitely a different.
This time, Quercio, I'm going to have to, let you go, Quercio. This time I'm going to show you a totally new way to do it. I highly recommend this, by the way, for songwriters. It is so satisfying to build a song for that long and then go to the chorus after 6 minutes. It's really, really, really fun. So, if you've ever sort of, wondered how can I build drama, that's a great way to do it. I recommend it.
I love it. Like I said, this is my second favorite song. Great approach, Bradley. So that brings us to the very last song on Boxer at Rest, and it's All Our Friends.
Hold tight as we're allowed.
to me, this sounds like it could be a tribute, maybe. Is that the fact?
Kind of. This is the second song that's about the ghost ship tragedy, as I interpret it. It's a tribute to people lost, and about or it comes out of what it felt like, essentially, to wake up, that day and learn about what had happened, and immediately just sort of thinking about the ripples of that through the community, all of the friends and family and coworkers and colleagues. You just think about sort of that, the way that moves through a community, a loss like that. And so it really was meant to be, I think, a kind of, again, sort of like Baby It's Still You, this sort of loving message of letting people know what they mean, letting people know they're appreciated, embracing them. And so, it's a good last song in that way, because for all of the dark stuff that we've been talking about with almost all of these songs, it's not, to me at least, it's not a dark record. It's a very hopeful record, and it's a very loving record, I think. And this song, I think, epitomizes it in a way, that it's about, comes out of this pretty horrific thing, but it's very much about appreciating people and recognizing, their value and their connection in your life and in your community.
That's beautiful. That's what it's all about to me.
Agreed.
Appreciating the people that we have in our circles. Yeah.
I don't want to stop talking to Bradley at all. I don't. But before we move on to other topics, because, if he brought in a chorus at the 6-minute mark, we can keep talking. But
we're just getting started, Soraya.
We're
really going to kick in.
Started. You think it's over. It's not.
Let's go now.
We're going to get our second win. We always like to share with our listeners places where, especially on social media and online, where they can find your music and find you. So let's start with Bye Bye Blackbirds. We both purchased Boxer at Rest from the group's Bandcamp page, and we want to know, is this the best place to go to find this album, Boxer at Rest, and all the previous albums, or is there another place that you prefer to direct people to?
No, definitely. Bandcamp is definitely the way to go. We've got everything that's in print there. They're the first record and the second record are out of print physically. Second one is available digitally there, but that's pretty much where everything's at. Some local Bay Area record stores have some of it, although currently I haven't been able to get to them and stock them up. So that's not really a thing. But yeah, Bandcamp is definitely the place to go.
Okay. And are you, or is the band available on social media if people would like to follow you, and where should they go?
Yeah, if you just look the band up on Facebook, our Facebook page is there and pretty active. I'm always putting reviews and videos and links and stuff up. So Facebook band page is the best spot.
Awesome. And then I've got one last question. And that is, because we're only in the 6-minute mark of our I want to know what you're listening to right now.
It's always a hard question because it's always a lot.
So how about I limit it? What are you listening to today?
Today, that's a good question. So today I haven't listened to much stuff yet because my wife is working from home, but there's a new record called Autobiography by the Moore Brothers that is really phenomenal. They're sort of local heroes around here, and if you talk to anyone who's a musician around here, at some point they will speak with reverence about the Moore Brothers. So their new record Autobiography is great. This whole pandemic, I've been on a real Blue Note jazz kick. So I've been listening to lots of Blue Note jazz. Jackie McLean in particular, so that's probably going to get played today. Maybe some Bobby Hutcherson, some more Blue Note jazz stuff. I have one of my hobbies is I love making Spotify playlists. Sometimes like best ofs for individual artists. Like that's a real fun thing that I like to do. And so I want to make one for the Walker Brothers. I was thinking that'd be kind of fun to try to see if I can get an hour's worth of good Walker Brothers out of their train wreck of a catalog. That might be fun. I have a playlist of all my favorite hip hop songs from the year that I want to go through and really listen to carefully. So, this is sort of how I, get through days is by having a combination of just like new things that I love that I'm excited about, plus sort of almost like project listening, today's the day when I'm going to dive into this.
Well, Jeff and I are definitely riding that train, mix of old and new. So we're right along with you. Yeah. And if we wanted to find your list on Spotify, would we look for your name? Like, can we find you, or are you private and we need a VIP pass?
I don't know. I sort of just do this for myself and then I send it to friends. But
okay.
The username that I use on Spotify is Vecchia Signora.
Oh, La Vecchia Signora.
Yeah, it's not going to be the easiest thing in the world to look up, I guess. But I don't know if you look that up, if my playlists pop up or not. I hadn't really thought about that. But I do share them on my personal page, and I'm always happy to send things to people if they want. But yeah, no, I hadn't really thought about that before. You're the first person to really ask, I guess.
Well,
I was just assuming people are like, I don't want to listen to an hour of the Walker Brothers. Leave it, leave me alone.
Sounds like a good time to me.
So wait, I have to ask, are you a Juve fan that you're calling yourself La Vecchia Signora?
Yeah, that's my soccer team. That's one of I'm a big sports fanatic in general. And
yes, I know.
Huge in my little sports universe. So yeah, that's where that came from. And I can't believe I actually got that. Usually any Juve related nickname is going to be taken by the time you get to log into something. But I must have been early enough on Spotify that the crazy Italians had not overrun it yet.
There you go.
All right, so Bradley, we've talked a lot about Boxer at Rest. Can we expect new music from the Bye Bye Blackbirds in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I've actually written more than I expected since the album came out. It usually takes me a while to kind of retool, but we've written some stuff. We've been passing it around. I haven't really, I don't necessarily have a vision for an album in place yet, but it'd be fun to do a single. It'd be fun to do something, get some things rolling. There's a band from Portland called Eyelids that I love, and they're really inspiring to me in part because it seems like they always find ways to put new stuff out. Like they make great records and those come out fairly regularly, but they always kind of fill those gaps with cool things, cool projects. And my thinking has been a little more along those lines, like maybe some way to get something out sooner than the usual 2 or 3 years or whatever it takes between records. So yeah, there's definitely more coming, and hopefully it will be cool.
Very cool. I would imagine if Boxer at Rest is any indication, it will definitely be cool. All right, Bradley, we said we'd take an hour of your time. We've gone over a little bit, but I thank you so much for sharing these stories and background behind this album that Soraya and I are. It's definitely high on our list for the year so far.
Absolutely.
We absolutely love the album. We really appreciate you taking time to walk through it with us.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate you listening, carefully and closely and responding and really thinking about it. It means a lot, and hopefully your listeners will be excited by it and want to dig in themselves. So thank you. It's much appreciated.
Awesome having you on, and hopefully this won't be the last time, and we'll have you on, when that new single drops.
Anytime, yeah, that'd be great. That'd be really fun.
I like that he said it. Anytime. We're all in. We're all in.
All right, Bradley. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you. You guys take care, all right?
All right,
You
you
do
as
the
well.
same. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. What do you think, Soraya?
You know what? Jeff and I have just, we've walked through Box Art Rest. Bradley Scott he's a real deal. Serious.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely.
and great lyricist, really good vision as a musician and kind of arranging and putting things together. And then, like, how many people do you know that says, you know what? I'll take on that challenge of releasing it independently and doing all of it myself. And on his social media, there are, excuse me, there are photos of him, carrying the packages to be sent. I mean, like, he's a real deal, and he is. I mean, this was a lot of fun to talk to him.
Yeah, I knew from the lyrics alone that having a conversation with Bradley would be very interesting, and it definitely was. So you could tell he's a very heady guy when you read through the lyrics, and he's a person that has a heart. So that combination doesn't always happen if you have somebody that's heady and is emotional and a very caring person. So
Right.
I love the optimism that's in this album, even though it deals with some pretty heavy, dark issues with the loss of friends, the loss of, I would say, with the venue that burned down, that's a loss of almost like a second home, right? I mean, you're dealing with some heavy things, but there's still optimism throughout this album. And I didn't mention the fact that I love his voice. The first time I listened to it, and he started singing. I was like, "Whoa, his voice is a little bit different." But I've grown to really, really love his singing voice. And there's some fabulous harmonies on this album, which I know you're a fan of. You love harmonies,
Huge.
yeah. So. The Box Art Rest, definitely a fantastic album. I'm really glad that Matt took the time to point us in the direction of this album because it's fantastic.
Yeah. And we want to encourage you all, if you like what you hear in this episode, go support the band, go to their Bandcamp page. This album, as well as others that are available either with a physical copy or um, digital access, are out there. You will not be disappointed at all. This is one of my favorites of the year.
Agreed.
So, whew. All right, Jeff. So, should we wrap up the song? Are we in minute 7?
We are.
after
We are.
after our chorus showed up in minute 6.
Yes.
I mean, now that he told the story about it, it's like, oh, okay, I like it.
I love that too.
So, hey, agruiar.
Groove on, Paisley people. All right, you won't hear that, so I'll stop that.